Around this time last year, we were definitely on a run with some very interesting, tragic, and questionable incidents within the railroading space. Despite a few minor things, it definitely dried up for a while. But then one morning this last week, I'm scrolling through news headlines and all of a sudden I see something that finally catches my attention. And oh boy, I did not see this one coming. Wasn't it just a few videos that a giant railway system like BNSF and CN combined more likely than not will occur eventually, but I think we should probably be glad that it didn't for now. Wow, that aged poorly. So, we might just be losing the railroad famed for having the greatest safety practices and reputation out of any of the 6 remaining Class 1s, and it's being bought out by the Union Pacific of all companies. I gotta say, I always wish that if Norfolk Southern were to be bought out, it would be BNSF acquiring them, cause like, look how nicely those names integrate. Look, I even have a logo I made for them back in 2022. This proposed $85 billion, that's billion with a B, deal would span 50,000 miles across 43 states. It is said that if they succeed, this would put 2/5 of the entire country's rail freight in the hands of one singular giant company. And honestly, I think we gotta come up with a different word than giant for this, because both Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern are already massive mega corporations, and putting them together is like even more mega. To put it into perspective, these two together would be worth somewhere very close to $250 billion, which is larger than both my bank account and the GDP of 138 countries, or 70% of all countries in the world. Anyway, a company this big is obviously going to have equally as large opportunities. Large opportunities to be even more monopolistic and cost us all even more. Let's look at the implications and potential pros and cons from a merger like this. We'll start with the pros, which is pretty much just going to be what both Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern have publicly stated, from Norfolk Southern on Facebook. Moving forward together, Norfolk Southern and Union Pacific Railroad announced plans to combine and create America's first true transcontinental railroad, connecting over 50,000 route miles, 43 states, and nearly 100 ports. This is a historic first step toward connecting people, strengthening communities, and transforming the U.S. supply chain. How does this help everyday Americans? By connecting our rail networks, we can move goods faster and more efficiently across the country, from food and household supplies to cars and building materials. More direct coast-to-coast routes means a more efficient system to keep shelves stocked and businesses running smoothly. That means more reliable deliveries, stronger supply chains, and good-paying jobs staying here in the US. We'll also compete more effectively with trucking, giving customers more choices and easing highway congestion. From manufacturing hubs to small towns, this combination will support local communities across the country. Union Pacific emphasizes very similar points on their website, which you can check out for yourself. They say things like, creating the Union Pacific Transcontinental Railroad is overwhelmingly in the public interest and will enhance competition, consistent with the tests that will be applied in the review of the transaction by the Surface Transportation Board. Sounds like all sunshine and rainbows, but what both Norfolk Southern and Union Pacific are doing here is a classic example of a corporate spin. They're highlighting things that sound good, but in widely accepted economic theory have drawbacks so drastic that most perceived short-term benefits are eventually outweighed by the bad. Let's take a look at the full picture and be a little more critical. I'm not a qualified economist, so to speak, but it was my favorite subject in high school, so pretty much I have the ability to... While it is generally true that the effect of increased efficiency and reduced headache of having to work through several rail companies can be positive for shippers and consumers in the short term and add a good deal of extra convenience, it's worth asking what could potentially happen to prices later down the line as these behemoths of companies continue to consolidate. Both companies also claim that it, quote, enhances competition. Norfolk Southern claims it enhances competition with trucking in particular. But something I want to point out is the fact they're sidestepping the most obvious reality, and that is that they're actively reducing consumer choice in their very own sector by combining two of the already few railroads shippers have to choose from. I thought that was pretty funny. In the world of economics, it's common knowledge that when fewer suppliers exist for a good or service which is in extremely high, essentially infinite demand, these fewer suppliers, in this case railroads, can eventually start raising prices for anyone who ships with them. We call this an increase in market power, and it happens to every company in an industry when when competition is lost or absorbed. Now, despite countless mergers, the cost per ton mile to ship via rail has gone down significantly since the 80s, and as of a 2017 study, we still sit at an astonishing inflation-adjusted 46% lower rates than the 1980s, but this is largely due to infrastructure and technological advancements. That isn't to say mergers haven't helped consumers, as they directly contribute to that increased efficiency and more overall capital for investments, but as the old saying goes, all things in moderation. The landscape of the United States railroad industry is already getting to be fairly monopolistic by definition, even with our 6 Class 1 railroads. In a sense, it's probably safe to say that the railroad has reached a good happy medium which allows a competitive enough landscape that consumers can't be totally screwed over due to a lack of choice. What will happen if choice gets narrowed down even further? You can probably guess. Take a look at this analysis done by CostMine Intelligence last year. As you can see, we've seen a steady increase in the cost per ton mile to move freight in the last 20 years. And just like everything, prices started reaching for the moon starting in 2020. But what's strange is that even after other transportation industries' rates and everything in general started normalizing and flattening out post-pandemic, railroads are still, 5 years later, seeing the same rate of shipping price increase per year. At this pace, costs may double every 2 to 3 years, which can compound very quickly and eventually leave us with more 1980s style shipping prices, despite all the progress that we've made in the last 20, 30 years. Combine this with a shaky economic environment, less competition, sprinkle a little corporate greed on top, which there is no shortage of in the railroad, and what we're looking at is a recipe for disaster. The cracks are already beginning to show, and this merger, while providing short-term benefits, looks to only contribute to the bigger problems the railroad industry is facing long term. Okay, but surely this would be the actual last Class 1 merger of our time, right? Right? Please? Well, it's all speculation, but apparently there are rumors that if the Surface Transportation Board were to approve this merger, for the sake of fair competition within the railroad sector, there would have to be either some trackage rights agreements for the 2 current largest competitors of Union Pacific and Norfolk Southern, which are BNSF and CSX, or, get ready for it, BNSF and CSX might have to merge all together. Yeah, you heard me right. This isn't some strange dream we're living in, unfortunately. This is actually something that's being thrown out there. BNSF and CSX have been quick to dismiss the claims, but as normal members of society, we had no idea what's going on behind the closed doors of these corporations. So, back to the merger that's a little less than just speculation for the time being. Despite the potential drawbacks that I just highlighted, is this actually on the table? Well, yes and no. Maybe. Union Pacific has indeed confirmed they will proceed with this $85 billion acquisition of Norfolk Southern. However, this deal is ultimately up to the Surface Transportation Board, or the STB, a government agency with the task of regulating things like railroad mergers, because this is a huge deal for virtually everyone who consumes things. Yes, that counts you too. You aren't safe from this. If you eat food, which for your sake I kinda hope you do, you rely on railroads and their shipping rates. The latest news we have on the STB's thoughts of this merger is nothing. They have received a formal notice from the Union Pacific and initiated the regulatory review process. Now, ideally, and I say ideally because lobbying exists and is a very real and unfortunate possibility when we're working with multi-billion-dollar corporations, the STB will go through their vigorous process of looking into all the potential gains and drawbacks from a merger like this. The STB does allow for a fair bit of public input, so people like shippers, labor unions, communities, and stakeholders will be allowed to add comments and voice concerns. Does input actually mean they have the capability of preventing or making anything happen? Probably not, but it's nice to assume the system isn't 100% rigged in favor of corporate interests. Wait a second. So, are we screwed? I would honestly have to say, probably not. I can't actually see this going through. But that doesn't mean no. This isn't to get political, but I think it's safe to argue that we're currently under a more deregulatory political environment, but whether or not it'll lean to the extreme of actually allowing this merger, only time will tell. Regardless of the economic implications, as a rail fan, it'll be interesting to see what goes down if it actually ends up happening. We could be looking at a potential rail traffic increase, seeing Norfolk Southern power more frequently on Union Pacific rails and vice versa, but probably not a new paint scheme. Union Pacific traffic historically absorbs, they don't merge. Losing another Class 1 doesn't sit well with me, to be honest, as I think we can all agree that power variety when trackside is already becoming non-existent, but to be fair, I'm glad it's Norfolk Southern we're losing rather than UP, because unless you're wrong, I think we can all agree that Union Pacific's paint scheme is a lot better. Either way, nothing is set to really happen with this until 2027, and a lot of review has to be done by the STB before it happens at all. Let me know your thoughts on this merger below. Me personally, I don't like it at all. It's less consumer choice, and more importantly, as a foamer, it's less like power choice, you know. Be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and thanks so much for watching. Thank you so much to my channel members as well.